Alright, so in this video, it's going to be some self-help tips on dealing with either swapping out a toilet and or doing some troubleshooting on a leaking toilet. I'm going to go over some basic tools and parts that you will need, definitely in regards to swapping out a toilet or a leaking toilet from the bottom. Other than that, that would be something with the angle stop that we'll go over, which will be a whole entirely different video. If that's something that you guys would like to see, let us know in the comments and we'll try to make that happen. But anyway, starting with this, you'll definitely need a new wax ring if you're swapping out a toilet. And in most cases, when you have a toilet that's leaking from the bottom seals, it's usually an old or blown out wax ring that needs to be replaced. Here I grabbed two different types. We have a wax ring that has what I call the horn or the bill in it. And then we also have what I refer to as a stacker ring. Sometimes you need just a little bit more of a seal with the wax, so a stacker ring helps. Here you're going to need a scraper, both for scraping off the old DAP off the bottom of the toilet and off of the flooring. That way you can do a nice clean seal again and it looks clean. Here's a tiny Tim. This is for cutting down the hardware so that you can get the china caps to fit. We'll go over that. You'll need a flathead so that you can, pop off the china caps. A sponge and rags and DAP for when you reset it. Sometimes the toilet won't always be level, so you need a shim or two. This is a hard plastic shim, but we also could use soft plastic shims or wood shims. Just really depends on what you like to use, but I prefer these hard plastic ones with a fresh razor blade. They'll cut real easily. Here we have a tape measure. Always going to need a tape measure. And then one thing that often gets overlooked, which you don't necessarily, I guess, have to have it, but having a shop vac so that you can suck out all the water after you turn off the angle stop will make your job a lot easier upon cleanup. And in this case here, we have the toilet that we're going to swap to. Now, one thing that's really important that's often overlooked is toilet sweeps are usually set at a 10 or a 12 inch. So ideally, from the center of the bolts here, you want to measure to the back wall. And you want to make sure that your toilet's going to fit, because it's going to really suck if you go through all the steps to change out a toilet and you're just going to end up putting the same one back in. So here, this one's about 11.5. If you really go off the main finish wall, the 12-inch sweat toilet. So here, when you're comparing with these, the main thing that you want to do is you want to come off the center of the bolts here, and you want to make sure that you have 12 inches before it's going to hit the back wall. Now here we look like we're just going to be close within those margins, so we should be able to make it and have no problems. Alright, so it's very important. One of the first things you do is you try to shut off this angle stop. This is a quarter turn angle stop. They also have gate valve style angle stops and a few others. But you want to make sure this not only turns, it doesn't start leaking. Then you want to flush out and make sure that your tank doesn't start to refill. Because if your tank starts to refill, then that means that you have an angle stop that isn't closing all the way. And that's going to be a whole different issue there. So as you see here, you can still try to flush out more. But there's water that stays in the tank, and then there's still water that stays inside the P-trap of the bowl. The reason why that's designed that way is to keep sewer gases from getting out of the toilet. And you don't want sewer gases. Basically smells like sour eggs. Not a good experience for anybody. Now, it's very important too, before you start doing any work, that you set your lid down somewhere secure, unless you know for sure you're going to trash it. That's like I said, you always want to make sure that you set it secure until you actually are finished. That way, if anything goes wrong, you still have your pieces. Alright, it's going to get loud for a second, but we're going to vacuum out all the water. pause it. All right. So I said we got our flathead. Let's see. So as we discussed here, these are the China caps. Usually you just gotta get a small flathead underneath there. Then sometimes they're a little difficult. Pop these guys off. Pop those guys off. So you can see there's a little bit of rust buildup and everything. That's why you always want to get the wax rings with the hardware. All right, and here we have our channel locks. If you're ever trying to take these off and the bolt underneath just spins, try to take out the other one. And then from there, there's other alternatives, but basically, more often than not, you're led to have to cut the bolt underneath because it wasn't properly secured, which does happen from time to time. And that's just something you got to deal with on a case-by-case basis, which it looks like we have on this side. I hope not. All right, so if this happens, one thing you can try before you cut it, grab another pair of channel locks. Let's see here. And then, all right, I'll try to set the phone down as best I can for this part. I don't think it's going to work out though. See if we can hold the bolt and get it loose. Okay, nope, it broke. Man, this thing is rusted. Well, in this case, we're gonna toast the toilet, so I don't have much of a problem with messing this up. It's not something I like to do, though. Not always a good alternative. All right, so as I said, we had to cut that bolt down with the Tiny Tim. Next, straight razor knife with a fresh blade. You're gonna run it pointing a little bit inwards, but not down too hard. This is linoleum tile, but even so, you don't want to scratch it up. But sometimes you're dealing with much more expensive flooring, and the last thing you want to do is leave a giant scratch on it from one of these brush blades. But the point is, you want to cut through that DAP seal because that's basically acting like a temporary glue, helping to hold the toilet in place. You usually have to, if it's a good DAP seal, to give it a couple of runs. Now, if you have water leaking out of the side here, it's usually because your wax ring's bad and it starts eating away at the DAP seal, and the toilet sometimes is already like just loose. Alright. Last thing, very important. Just make sure you disconnect this supply line. Because if you don't and you try to pull up the toilet, you could rip it out of the wall and cause a much bigger problem. It's going to be a little bit of water that was still inside the fill valve, but as long as your angle stop is shut off, nothing big. And now you're ready to pull the toilet. Alright, so we're about to pull the toilet. It's very important when you're lifting a toilet that you grab it from somewhere that's secure. But whatever you do, don't grab it from the inside underneath there. Toilets aren't actually strong like people think they are. They're just like a porcelain bowl. They will break very easily. Alright, so as I was saying, this wax ring, sometimes when these things get a little too worn out, we'll say, like there, then you'll start having the water leak out, and then that's when you get leaks. So sometimes you just have to change a wax ring if it's only leaking from the bottom, but in this case we're going to go ahead and change it out. Alright, this is where your scraper also comes in handy, and then you just grab a trash bag. I guess not a trash bag, it's a grocery bag, but all the same. Great, that's brought it up a little bit. That's going to be fun. These old bolts out. Yeah. Alright. Alright, and then got a little bit of this toilet paper. Wipe off the tip of this. And then you can use the razor knife if you want, but downside with the razor knife is you press too hard, you're gonna end up cutting up the flooring. And like I said before, depending on what kind of your flooring you're dealing with, that can be very expensive to fix or replace. You usually notice at the back end of the toilet there's usually not a lot of dap. That's actually how it's supposed to be. That way if you have a leak, the water will push out back that way and start to pull up instead of immediately going out in the front. And hopefully you would catch it before it got too bad. But so we got our hardware bag and our wax ring. Little plastic washers that they come with are made to help keep them in place while you set them. And you're going to have 4 washers and 4 nuts. One is for an underset, because these bolts being in the right place and properly secured makes all the difference to how well your toilet sits in place. Okay, you get them nice and hand tight. Sure to lift up, not push down. That way you actually get all of the bolt that's there. Alright, next, another use for the tape measure. You want to make sure both of these bolts are set at the same distance off the wall. So usually you find which one will go all the way back without coming out. So that's 11.5. And set this guy to 11.5 as well. That way when you set the toilet, it sets as level as possible, and then you'll measure it off the back, which we will do just to make sure it's also still level, because you don't want to be sitting on a toilet that's cattywampus. Alright, now it's not always guaranteed, but the way I like to take these out with the least amount of problem, you start finding these and you just go all the way around and you pull those down. Then stick your finger to the center of the ring, and more often than not, as long as you've prepped it properly, that comes right off. And then you're not pulling out all those little pieces. Set your ring there. Then you need to clear up some area in your workspace. gonna set this guy. The easiest thing to do is to just look for the bolts on each hole, and more often than not, they'll find their home. And then you want to press down with a lot of your weight.
Dad, your phone's on 5.
It's okay. All right. Got those nice and in. All right. Gonna set down those. Get those ready for the china caps. That down. All right. Now this toilet has a little bit of a elongated nose. Isn't as wide in the back. So we'll have to clean up the tile a little bit more here, but it's not a problem. This is a much better flowing toilet. Get better flushes, all that good stuff. All right, now hook back up the supply line first chance you get. Okay, that's just nice and taken care of. As we said before, this is a good fix for either a toilet that's leaking at the bottom from the wax seal or not being properly set, or if you just need to swap out a toilet real quick. As long as you have the right tools, make the right preparations. In most cases, this is about a 30 to 45 minute job. Obviously in this video we didn't go over assembling a toilet. Most toilets have a basic setup unless you start going into the smart toilets or tanklesses, which have a whole different setup, but the instructions are always fairly straightforward. Alright, so before we completely tighten down these bolts, one thing you want to do is you want to lean on the nose of the toilet and let go. We don't hear any shaking on the tank. Don't hear any shaking, so we won't need to shim it out. Then we'll take our tape measure, see about the edge of the bowl, or 1 1/4 inches here, or 1 3/8 inches, which means that the nose should go to the right some more, a little bit more. There we go. Then we're going to completely tighten these down, but because these are a fresh set of bolts, they're way too long for the china caps to obviously fit. So that is when, again, our friend Tiny Tim comes in. You're going to want to go about just a couple of threads above top of this. Some china caps have a little bit more room, but these ones are small. Obviously, the fresher the blade, the quicker the cut, but you just want to remain consistent in there. That friction help keeps it warm, breaks it out quicker. Once you get about halfway through, you're usually able to grab your channel locks and give it a good break. Well, rather a bend and then snap. As Reese Witherspoon from Legally Blonde put it. A bend and snap. All right. All right, and then with these guys, they can be a little difficult sometimes resetting them. Wipe down your area, and then boom. You'll know they're there when you hear them pop, and you can wipe without it moving around. All right, now we're gonna turn on the water, clean up our work area, because the last thing you want to do rather, is set DAP on the dirty ground. It's not gonna be good for anybody. Make your DAP seal look nasty. It's just not good work. I don't believe in being perfect when you do something, but if you're going to do it, you should at least do it to where it looks good. Or as the best as you can.
I stuck on my fingers and it hurt.
Alright, now before we dap it, we're going to do some test flush. Want to make sure that everything flushes properly and we're not getting water out of the sides, because if we're getting water out of the sides, that means we need to re-pull it, check the wax ring, and or reset it.
One.
Alright, so with a tube of DAP, I don't know if it'll show up, but there's different angled lines depending on how fine of a feed you want. As you work with it more, you'll come to find what's good for you. You look here, this toilet doesn't have a very big gap at the bottom, so we don't need to cut our DAP tube too wide open. So some people think you need a DAP sponge for setting DAP. I tend to use a sponge with tubs and stuff, but with toilets I think a finger and a good rag tend to do the job. But you start almost halfway to the back of the toilet, and once you go, you just want to keep going. You don't want to stop, because that's what's going to cause inconsistencies in your fill. Because there's always going to be extra DAP when you come to clean up, and you can fill in afterwards. You angle your DAP tube properly and you cut it at an angle, it'll fill in actually underneath. And take your finger on each side, run it down with the intention to not only get up extra DAP, but to push the DAP that's in between your finger and the bowl into the gap. Toilet paper. Alright. Take off the rag that's a little wet. Alright, here we have a nice good DAP seal. Nice good toilet flushing. Alright, for more self-help videos, or if you have suggestions or comments that you'd like to make, please check us out on Minds at Baker the Low 13110. Or you can check us out at Valky's Gaming on youtube.com.